when we look at this whole process and where we're headed, I'd like to give some background and then give some issues that we need to address in order to be able to function as a life-giving parish in the future as far as our buildings and property. When our parish held the future mission convocation in 2010, the top priority was given to determining what we needed to do to be able to function as a parish, a living and strong parish, and to keep growing. Partly because of future mission, our number of groups and activities going on in the parish has grown, as well as people rising up to say, I would like to see us do this, and taking charge of that, which has been a blessing. We have an increase in a number of adult faith groups of various kinds and adult activities going on, which present issues for space, and as well as the recognition of a need for us to gather in larger groups, which we cannot do now in any way that is feasible for people who cannot negotiate the stairs. And so we looked at that, and a number of committees have been working on this, looking at this mainly from the perspective of parishes or committees that have done a lot. The Building and Grounds Committee, the Finance Committee, and Parish Pastoral Council. And so this has led us to this point. Now, many people ask, why do we need a new church? And the reason is there have been many changes in our parish, in our community of Harrison, and the townships that surround it, that make up our parish, and in the archdiocese, which have served to indicate that we cannot simply remain the way we are. Our current church has seating for 450, and we have 6 masses on a weekend. Our fire codes might say 500, but we are a very wide-shouldered people. And when we've taken counts when the church is full, 450 fit in the pews. And we have 6 masses each weekend, 4 Sunday, 1 on Saturday night, 5 on Sunday. The celebration of these liturgies would not be possible without the generous assistance of Father Shine and Father Dorman, for which I, and I think all of us, are most grateful. However, the shortage of priests is now being felt in the retired priest age group, and the Archdiocese has informed us that we cannot assume that we will have retired priests to be able to assist in the future. Now, and we really aren't in a position to wait until they can't help and then say, oh, now we need to look at what we're going to do. We need to be proactive on that. And we're looking at the best case scenario of being able to build, maybe in the best case scenario, to break ground in 3 years. Well, we can't wait 3 years if they aren't around to help us with that. And so that's one of the reasons why we're looking at this now and beginning now. The other issue is the Harrison community is really growing. From 2000 to 2010, the Harrison area has seen a 32% increase in population. This puts our community in the top 10% of the fastest growing cities, not just city, but areas in Ohio. We are the last part of Hamilton County that can grow significantly. Butler County can grow a lot, but Hamilton County, this is the last part that can grow. It is safe to assume that we'll continue to grow in those numbers. From 2008 until 2013, we have been increased by over 100 families, even during the housing slump, when we were not growing at a very fast rate, but now that that seems to have let up, we have been really growing at a quicker rate, I'd say, in the last 2 years. All you have to do is go out to the, I think it's called the Preserves of Whitewater, which I think sat there for like 2 years with maybe 5 houses on it. Last summer, it was August, I thought, I'm going to drive back there and just see how many houses are there. I counted only houses where it was clear there were people living in them, not being built, but living in them. I counted 58 houses that were completed and people living in them. And then I thought I better get out because they were looking at me funny for driving around slow, looking at their houses. Some of them had very nice living rooms, but So we're finding that we're growing as well. The third factor we need to look at from an archdiocesan perspective is that the archdiocese has begun assigning pastors to regional areas of parishes. In other words, a pastor in certain places is the pastor of 2 parishes. And that, of course, means that those parishes cannot maintain the same mass schedule they have. Now, some places are getting an associate, a newly ordained associate, but newly ordained associates will not stay there extremely long, and they'll move on to become pastors at other places. So in looking at that, in our own deanery, in the past year, we have gone from 1 region sharing pastors to 4 regions who are sharing pastors or are prepared immediately to share pastors. I can't remember if it's St. Vincent's or St. Al's on the River. It shares a pastor with St. Simon's. St. Jude and St. Aloysius will share a pastor beginning July 1st. St. Teresa and St. William are in a situation where an administrator has been named, and when the pastor of St. William's, when his term expires, that they will have 1 new pastor there. The tendency is not to name the pastor who's already there, although there are occasions when they do it because people tend to say, you like them better than us, you knew them before us. And so to keep from fights, they usually put a new pastor in. And then there's 1 more parish that is in that process, although the new administrator has not been named for there. So we're seeing this growth, this change taking place in our own deanery. Therefore, we're looking at right now that we would not be affected probably for 10 years. But the Archdiocese Planning, Regional Planning Office said, in 10 years, St. John's will probably share a pastor with someone else. So we're looking at an increase in size, we're looking at a reduction in masses, and then we're going to look at a further reduction in masses when the pastor shares with both places. I've had people say to me, well, we'll just have to figure out a way that you can do 4 or 5 masses on a Sunday. Well, if you put yourself into that, you can't do that. But also, by canon law, a priest is only allowed to celebrate 3 masses on a Sunday. And so that would not be, that would be a problem to do on a number of fronts. So we're looking at these situations, and that's where we're coming up with looking at what size church we're going to need, which we'll talk about in a little bit. That is not completely ironed out, the size church we need. But what we're looking at is saying we need, in what we call the footprint, which is just the plan of buildings and what fits where. We're looking at the maximum size, because if you look at the minimum size and then say, oops, we need more, you look and say, oh, we could fit the first size there, we can't fit the second. And the second thing we want to look at, and we'll have determined this, is we don't want to build a church where you're just shooting L's and additions on that don't work for good worship. I can tell you from this perspective here, good worship is not simply what people want. Good worship is the investment of people in the liturgy. And the farther back people go in the loft, the less investment and participation I see on Sunday. And I'm not condemning those people, but I'm just saying you don't want to build a building that doesn't facilitate that. That's the area that clears out first of people leaving early. One time we had a penance service last year and I needed hymnals. And I thought, I got to have them back in the pews by morning for school mass. So I thought, I'll take them out of the back, up at the top. They were like new. They've been in those pews as long as all the other hymnals have. They're not picked up. So that tells you the Archdiocese says, based on general church law from Rome, you must build a building that facilitates participation and is worthy of the act of worship. So we don't want to build a building where we're looking and saying, oops, we need more space, we're going to shoot something off this side or that side. It's possible to build a building and say, we finish off the part we need and might use the other parts until we need them for various things. And that is a greater savings too, to do that. So those are things we're looking at with it. But what's very clear to us is we need a church that holds at least 1,000 people. At least 1,000 people. By cutting back to 3 masses, we would be doubling the church attendance we have, the number of spaces we would need. And right now, 450 is the maximum we can do. We already have people standing at 4 o'clock Mass and at 10:30 Mass during the school year. And so those are issues we have to look at. So in order to provide the opportunity for people to attend Mass, what we theologically call fruitfully, where they enter into it and are formed and grow in faith, we need a larger church. When the Archbishop appointed me pastor here, he said to me, this was Archbishop Larchin, you were going to have to build a new church. When I saw him 4 weeks later, he said, how's that new church going? Luckily with his sickness, he doesn't remember all those things, so I get by a little. But Archbishop Schnur confirmed that church. We need to look at a bigger church here. You know, in the growth of the greater Harrison area, we began facing those issues in the 1980s with the expansion of the loft and the building of the Gatto building for the school. And then within 10 years, discussions about the need for even more space began. At that time, St. Teresa Benedicta in Bright was not in existence at the time, and that took a good deal of pressure off of us to have to act at that time. But now that pressure is reoccurring. 10 years ago, actually 10 years ago, 2 weeks ago, 10 years ago and 2 weeks, we bought the property on New Haven Road in Carolina Trace. That property, if you're not familiar with it, is on, I think, because the road's wide, I think it's the southeast corner of New Haven and Carolina Trace, the side of Mingus Funeral Home, and there's houses along both Carolina Trace and New Haven, but behind them are the 26 acres we own. If you drive out that way, you'll see that there's been, I think it's corn that's been planted there this year, corn planted there. There's 6 acres south of that is owned by, I think LifeSpring now owns it. It was originally bought by a Baptist church, and then they sold it to LifeSpring. So anyhow, we have that property. Father Shine stated in the Crossroads in June of 2003, I do not personally envision major construction on the site in the near future, but when the time comes for expansion, it will be available. And the time for expansion has come. So now our decision is, do we stay here or do we move there? And that's what we're looking at. For over a year, Paul Will, our business manager, pastoral counsel, finance and building and grounds and finance, and I have been working with the architectural firm Ridgely, and specifically with Mike Ridgely, to study the pros and cons of building on our present site or on our land on New Haven Road. Each location offers benefits and challenges. The decision on where we will build will determine the progress of our parish for the next 50 to 100 years. So just as when this church was built, and I imagine wasn't built most Sundays, when they built this new church, because the former church, which was on the corner, as I understand, the corner of Hill and Harrison, couldn't meet the need, wasn't big enough, they looked with a future in mind to things growing, and this church has served us well for 90 years, going on 91 years. And so I think as a responsibility to the future, we need to look and say, what is the best thing we can do looking down the road 50 to 100 years? We don't have the crystal ball, but we can look and say we can see trends and developments occurring that we need to keep in mind. One of the things I want to say about the presentation, obviously, when you have a piece of land that there's nothing on, you don't have to take into consideration things that you have to take into consideration when you have buildings already on the property. So in the presentation, you're going to hear these are the challenges we'll face at this property, and we might not hear that about the other property. Oh, okay. I thought, what I do, I didn't touch it. I still look at computers as sort feelings in, and they hope you like it and give it back to you. But when we look at that, I don't want you to think, well, they're saying there's issues here, and there aren't issues there. Our biggest issue on that property is going to be the cost, because it's going to cost more for the bring in the utilities and things we need with that. But I don't want people to think, well, they're just speaking bad about this. I don't think speaking bad is saying these are the situations we have to consider and look at. Once again, I thank you all for coming, because I think an informed decision is the best decision we can have. One of the things I want to tell you is, on Sunday we had so many questions, we could only answer a few, and then the rest are being answered, and they'll be available on online at the parish website. I think they said Facebook. I don't know much about Facebook, so Facebook. And we'll have hard copies at church Saturday. They won't be in the bulletin because I got to get tonight's answers, and then we'll answer that. We won't have time, but they'll be available at the church doors. And I urge you to take those to see what are answers to the questions that are raised. Most of which are very good, some of which I think we said that it's in the booklet, but then I look at what I read and think, I asked the same thing, and it's right there. So I want to hand this over to Paul for the presentation itself. Thank you.
Thanks, Father, for giving that vision and kind of where we are, where we're going, and some factors to consider. Basically, what we're presenting tonight is the two location options. We're going to call the in-town option A, the property option B, as a point of reference, and then we're also going to show a cost comparison between the two at the end as well. But as we go through this process, we'll be showing you different slides and different things to think about in making your decisions. And as Father said, we're going to present the pros and cons of both sides and just general concerns that have been brought up. One of the things that we've been working with the architect is, what's this church going to look like? And Father and the committee and we've all decided that we want a church that's going to be somewhat historic for us, looking somewhat traditional looking. We don't see ourselves building a modern church. This is a rendering that the architect had done for St. Mary's in Franklin, because that was a similar type of design that they were looking for as well. So we want a church that's going to look like a church. We don't want a church that's going to look like a pole barn or some type of prefab factory building, but something that's going to be appealing, and when somebody sees the building, they're going to say, "Oh, that's St. John's Church." We want to reflect, our historical values, our heritage, in this as well. One of the opportunities we can have doing that is potentially taking the stained glass windows out of this church and incorporating them into the new church. There again, we need to get some cost estimates on what it will cost to reglaze the windows and make them weather resistant for the new church. And there again, we also have to consider the new church would be potentially 3 to 4 times larger than this church. So we have to consider the scale of our windows and the scale of the new building to see what would be the right combination for that as well. And one thing I want to point out as well is, this is a closer view of the church, is that the church is going to be the same regardless of whichever location is chosen. So everything that we're going to present, the cost comparisons, when we're talking about the church itself, it will be the same whether it will be built on the in-town location or on the new property. That was one thing that we said, it's because of the space and everything that we need, it's one thing that really wouldn't change in our whole process.
I'd like to just reiterate, this is just an example of the type of church we're looking at. This is not our church, but we want you to know it would be more in traditional look. So when the plans develop, we say, it doesn't look like what they showed us before. This is just to give you a sense
Right.
somewhat.
And everything we're showing you tonight is just a concept. Nothing is in cement, you know. It's just kind of where we have taken things so far and kind of, you know, it's time for us to present to the parish. And it's like, all right, these are the things that we've flushed out to this point and this is our current campus. The red line is pretty much our property line that goes around our property. The two yellow shaded areas are properties that we do not own. Everything else within that square is what our current properties are. Off to the right of the bottom yellow shaded area is our new house. And then the other house that's shaded is the greenhouse that's next to the service building. We have approximately 4 acres on our current site, so just as a point of reference. This is a concept, and again, I'm going to stress this is a concept of what the current church and layout would be for the in-town option. The 2 yellow shaded properties that we showed on the previous slide, those 2 properties would need to be purchased for this concept to work within town, just because of the layout of the church. There were 3 options originally in our process, you know, to build a new church on site, to build a new church on a new property, and the 3rd option was to expand our existing church. Based on the fact of the size of the church that we needed and the square footage that would be needed to build a church of that size, it was determined, because of where the current church is located, that there would not be available space to put the church without cutting into the school. There's also setback requirements by the city, so you guys stay so far away from the street. So we were kind of restricted in that little corner where we could not move forward with doing something different with this church. And as Father said, you know, we've also got to make sure that people participate and give them the environment to participate. And if we're stretching people out different directions where they may not have a good view of the altar, you know, that would inhibit their ability to participate and feel part of the church. So that was an option that we decided that was not going to work, you know, moving forward. You'll also see there are 2 shaded areas. The blue is basically what we're going to call phase 1, and the yellow will be phase 2. And with the church, the parish center would be located in the basement of the church. And again, this would be true for the new location. It's more important that the parish center would be located in the basement of this property just because of space. That there wouldn't be any space to do something elsewhere. The other thing is we wanted a parish center where people could gather that would not be interfering with a basketball bouncing upstairs or to the side. We had considered expanding the gymnasium and cafeteria and potentially using that for a parish center, and we just determined that that was not going to be a better option for us. The better option would be is to basically put the parish center in the basement of the church, so it would have its own space that could be used to grow our faith and parish as well. The yellow area, and then like I said, it's part of phase 2, would be an expansion of the gymnasium to make it a full regulation basketball court with extra seating for bleachers and that. The cafeteria would also be expanded underneath of that. We may not use that entire space for cafeteria space, but it could possibly be maybe some additional classrooms if needed. And then the other thing is, as we would be expanding our church and growing our parish, we also felt the need that we would have to invest money back into our school to upgrade our school a little bit as well. And when we get into the financial piece of it, you'll see kind of how that flushes out also. But you know, the 2 yellow areas would be a definite expansion that would be in phase 2. Potentially, you know, if we get into phase 2, there might have to be another extension to the school that we haven't listed yet on here. Also, probably wondering why we haven't shown the houses against Washington Street as parking. And we wanted to contain our project within the properties that we own and not go out as far as, to say, hey, we're going to buy those properties. But as those properties do become available, we would purchase those for parking. And just estimating on the number of houses along Washington and kind of the current market value, it would probably be in the $700,000 to $800,000 range to purchase those houses for parking. There again, we currently have about 150 to 60 parking spaces in our parking lot, depending on where you park it and some of the illegal spots to park. But in this design, as you can see, it would take parking down to about 77, so that our parking would be cut in half. One of the other things that we have to consider with the parking is the fact that if the children are on the playground, we don't have any parking for staff. So the staff would have to park on the street at that point also. There would be one central entrance to the church. As you can see, there's kind of a drop-off area. There is handicap parking that would be like in the first row and then over by the gymnasium and cafeteria area. That is a requirement that we would have, block off those areas for parking for our space. The city of Harrison has a parking requirement for the size of the building that we build. Their parking requirement is for every 4 people that you have capacity for, you need one parking space. I do have to say in our handout, it says that there would need to be 400 parking spaces, but it actually should be 300. Where we get to needing 400 spaces is 300 for church parking, and then if we have staff parking and if the gymnasium is being used, you would have to make sure you've got adequate parking for all of that as well. The other thing is, we would have to take down the new house in this process. Our current service building and garage would be taken down as well, so that this would fit. What that means is, for the youth, we'd have to find some type of room, potentially maybe in the church basement for them, so they would have a place to be. With the service building, what that means is we're going to have to find a location where we can store our maintenance supplies and some of our festival supplies. More than likely, we would look at a neighboring property to purchase that. Hopefully, they would have a sizable garage on that property, or maybe we could take the house down and do that as well. We've also considered looking at purchasing houses along Washington Street as well. There again, looking at the big scheme is if those properties become available, then we would investigate whether we should purchase those or not. The city has teased us, I should say, a little bit with the park across the street. We've had some conversations where they have told us that potentially that could be parking for us. We have pursued that several times with Dan Brooks, with the city of Harrison, have not got a definite answer. The one issue with that property is that there are graves on that property, and the property was donated by the family back in the Revolutionary War era to be a cemetery, and those graves cannot be moved. And then there's some issues, well, if the property is given to someone else or sold to someone else, where does the inheritance go on that? And there's a lot of research that would have to be done. So the city has not really given us an answer if that would even be an option at this point. And with that in mind, we've not even considered that as part of this project as even a possibility for obtaining that. And then moving on to parking, the city has also told us that we need these 300 parking spots for our church if we build it. And they know that we don't have the space on site for 300 spots, but they've also told us that we could count parking spots that were within 500 feet of our property. So we potentially count the parking spots that kind of are in this yellow area. And the red spots that you're seeing are area churches. Now, those area churches also have access to count those as their parking spot as well. The thing of it is, with those street parking that is available, we also have to be considerate of our neighbors, because we don't want to be parking in, residential areas and then they get upset that on Sunday morning they go out, they grab a gallon of milk and they came back and, somebody's taking their parking spot for church. So that's one of the issues with that. The other issue is we have no jurisdiction over those parking spots. And, even though the city is willing to say we can count those today, I just saw in the Harrison paper this week where there was some parking spots downtown where they were going to restrict parking, and residents that live in those apartments and what have you said, hey, we need a place to park as well. So you cannot limit that. So it's already one ruling that has taken effect, just recently, where the residents have stood up and said, hey, we need our parking spaces. So we got to keep that in mind. And like I said earlier, currently most of our teachers park on either side of the greenhouse in those two little parking spaces, which leaves the entire other area for the kids to play in. With this design, with the in-town property, staff would have to then park on the street, which, we're talking 40 to 50 people that are driving. That's going to take up parking spots, around the block. And, what does that do to residential parking as well? The other thing that, and I just want to go back to the design here as well. With our festival, we use up the majority of our parking lot currently for our festival. Our festival brings in $100,000 a year. So we are going to have to figure out a way, if we stay in town, how will our festival operate? Because we financially cannot have a festival because of its impact to help us sustain our operating budget. So there would have to be some considerations with that as well. How are we going to handle that with our current site? All right. Okay. This is a drawing of our current property. If you look at the very top road, that would be New Haven Road. If you look off to the left is Carolina Trace. Off to the right is Radcliffe Drive. And there is a small street that comes in off of Radcliffe, which is, I think, Barney Court. Just to let you know, when the architect drew this, we saw the street dead ending into our property. And I've got to call in Dan Brooks right now to see if it's even feasible for us to hook into that street. We don't know if that's an option, if the developer left that option for us or not. So that might not even be an option. But with this property, we do have two easements. There's one off of Carolina Trace. You can see the two little white lines coming in off to the left there. And then if you look at the far corner to the right, kind of where the little green dot is there with the tree, if you go straight up, there's another easement there. The problem with that easement is it is right next to Radcliffe, which is right next to the curve on Carolina Trace. We don't really think that is going to be a feasible option to put a drive-in at that point. What could be an option is to purchase another house along the perimeter of the property and either expand our current entrance or to create a new entrance, maybe off of New Haven. That's an option, and there again, it's something else that we're looking at, and we've not firmed that piece of it up yet. But this property is approximately 26 acres, and my father had indicated we purchased this 10 years and 2 weeks ago, exactly. So this is kind of what we're looking at for the existing property. Again, just as in the last slide for the in-town property, the property out there, New Haven, the blue area would be phase 1, and the yellow area would be phase 2. And you also see that there is a new school on that property. in the Phase 2 option. The only difference, or one of the differences between this Phase 1 and the in-town Phase 1 is this Phase 1 would contain parish offices. Right now, we have that as a freestanding building, which is connected to the school. There could be a potential option that those offices are more connected or within the church. There again, this is a concept, and we're basically just kind of looking at square footage at this point to see how much space would be needed. There is the perimeter drag that goes kind of around the top and out to Barney. If we would purchase one of the houses off of New Haven, the perimeter drag would not be needed. You could just basically go kind of straight up from the school or wherever the property will be located. That does give us some additional exposure off of New Haven Road as well. The other item is we would need to purchase a neighboring house or a house in the neighborhood that would be used for the rectory, because with the church being out there, it would make sense for Father to live close to the church, so when we say Mass, it's an easy commute for him, or on a golf cart. It's just kind of focus in a little bit on the Phase 1 property. As you can see, in the church would have a drop-off area, and there again the required handicap parking that would be needed. Again, there would be a basement within the church that would function as a parish center. We do have enough property that we could build an above-the-ground parish center. I think cost-wise, it probably would be less costly to put a basement in versus building another freestanding building. But there again, this is a concept. Another concept would look at maybe a freestanding parish center that would be on ground level as well. If you do a basement, you're definitely going to have some type of elevator to get people from the ground level down below. There's also a service entrance that goes around behind the building, and it does go into the church. What that is indicating that we would use part of the basement of the church for maintenance storage, and also maybe festival storage, that it wouldn't totally be 100% parish center, but also some storage and service accessibility as well. The parking lot is 400 spaces. That includes the spaces that would be in front of the church, and then also the spaces that would be in to the north of the school as well. So there's 400 total parking spaces. Again, we would need 300 minimum just to handle the church, and then you have another 100 for staff and other functions that may be going on simultaneously. Phase 2, again, would be the construction of a school, and we don't anticipate Phase 2 would start any sooner than probably 10 years after the completion of Phase 1. Just the fact that the timing of getting everything paid off and settled, and then trying to begin a new campaign to do the school. The school is designed for capacity of 500 students. That's 150 more than we currently have in our school. 150 to 200 more. So we are, again, trying to plan for growth for the school as well. With the in-town design, we're also trying to plan for growth there as well. So, when we look at the cost comparisons, what you will see is what it would cost to build a brand new school for 500 students. And then you'd also see costs for what it would cost to get our current location up to 500 students. Now, there again, it's not going to be 500 students tomorrow, but looking in the future as the community grows, there's the potential for the enrollment of our school to rise back up as well. And we would need an opportunity to house those students. What you also see off to the right is sports fields. to completely finish these sports fields. And again, this is a concept of what could be put in. What our concept and our costs do include is the grading of those fields, since the heavy equipment is out there in the parking lot and other site work. It only makes sense to go ahead and get those areas prepped and seeded. Then we would work with the athletic association, so then they could basically put in dugouts, fences, all the other stuff that would be needed for the sports fields. But just to let you know that we are not planning that to be a true part of the campaign. It's just the initial prep work that would be needed, and it would just make economic sense to get that done prior, when the equipment is there. The main part of the school is kind of the cross, as you can see, which would basically be the classrooms. It would be a multi-story facility, so a minimum of probably 2 floors. And then the area that you would see behind your offices would probably be gymnasium, cafeteria, a lot of the common areas that the school would use, which could also serve the parish as well. So it would be more of a central area that those things could be shared by the school, could be shared by the parish as well. So we could take full advantage of those options as well. And then again, that's just an overall view of the entire concept. This is a drawing, and it's interesting because it gives a point of perspective. Both of the locations are drawn to the same scale. So as you can see, the large area, which is the 26 acres, and then if you look to the left, you see our current campus. If you kind of envision, you can take our current campus, and it would pretty much fit within the parking lot on the new property. So as a point of reference, and like I said, it shows both of the properties to scale, so it kind of shows what we have currently, what is out there, and kind of what the opportunities are for the new property. Okay, this is where it is. Basically, we have a side-by-side comparison of the cost of the entire campus for both phase 1 and phase 2. I'm going to kind of walk through the option A, which is the town version, and what is included in the $13.8 million, again, is the church and the parish center, and there again, that cost is going to be the same on the new property, so that cost is not changing from one location to the other. The site work here in town will be minimal. We have a current parking lot. There will be some new driveways put in, all the utilities here, so we have to put in a that. And so the site work is going to be minimal here in town. Again, I mentioned the storage and maintenance building. Since that is being removed for the church, the new church, we're going to have to find a location for that storage. I'd asked the architect if it would be possible to duplicate what we have on the new property with putting some of that storage under the church here in town. And it presents a real challenge because as you drop from street level down to basement level, you've got some elevation, and we don't really have a space where we can drop a driveway in to get stuff down, that you could access it. So we don't think that's going to be an option. That's not this time, but it's something that we've asked for to be looked at. Again, property acquisition, that is money put into this budget to acquire the 2 properties that we would definitely need to move forward with this. It does not include any other properties that were not shaded yellow. So the properties along Washington and Park are not included in this number. The last item on the in-town property for phase 1 is our debt reduction. We currently have about $600,000 left on our property debt that has not been paid off yet. And then we have another $250,000 in debt for healthcare insurance that goes back several years for when we were a little bit tighter than what we would like, and we could not afford to pay the health insurance for our employees. So the Archdiocese basically gave us a loan at that point, so we could continue to provide insurance for our employees. That went on for about 2 or 3 years, and accumulated that debt. So we're slowly trying to pay that off as well. But for us to move forward on this phase, we also have to pay off that debt. So we've included that $850,000 within that 13.8 million. If we move over real quick to the option B, which is the property, so we can concentrate on phase 1. Like I said, the new church and the parish center, again, is the same cost, either location, so you're not looking at any differences there. The church offices is an additional thing that we do need for the new property. We've talked to some parishes that were in a similar situation to us where they were building a new church on new property that wasn't on their current location. And I think both of those churches initially did not put their offices at their new location, turned around and found space to put their church offices, the parish offices, just because if you're building a new church, starting to shift that focus to the new facility, it just works out better to do it that way. Again, the athletic fields, the only amount that we do have in there is for the grading and seeding of those athletic fields. And I looked at that detail, and that was only about $60,000. I say only $60,000. The site work, when we started doing this phase, we knew there was going to be much more site work needed on the new property versus the in-town. We hired, I'm going to get this right, Kleinger's, which is a civil engineering firm out of Cincinnati, to basically take that property design and do a detailed calculation of what the site work would cost. So we really have nailed down that cost and feel very confident that we have got everything included within this cost. Again, the debt retirement is the same in both locations. And then the rectory, again, we'll be looking to purchase a neighboring house somewhere out there for a rectory. The other thing that we have included in these costs is we have included a 10% contingency because by the time that we start this project, there's probably going to be some price increases and what have you. So we've included a 10% contingency. The other thing that we've included is the Archdiocese assessment, which is 5.7% of whatever we take in as our campaign. That is a lot less than our operating expense or operating revenue assessment. So the Archdiocese does lower that for capital campaigns as well. Dropping down to phase 2, there again, we've included dollars in the in-town location to include renovations of the junior high building, the elementary building, and the aisle building, and then also the expansion of the gymnasium and cafeteria. And then there's another space there that is for additional office space because we anticipate that we're going to want the offices probably incorporated within the church area as well. The option B property, basically brand new school, total cost to build a school. The other thing that's important to remember in these costs that we're presenting, that is a move-in rental cost. That includes all the internal furnishings, pews, lights. It's totally furnished. And you know, it's not that we're going to have to come back and say, oh, we forgot that. This is a total hidden cost for those items.
Thank you, Paul. Very well done presentation. All in the pinch hit with the architect. And I hope the Architect Sunday was first class. Paul did very well, so thank you very much. This is the time that we want to deal with questions. And what we're going to do in the interest so that we have as close to comparable presentations between Sunday and tonight, we did, as Paul started to mention, there are some questions, there's some cards in the pews where you can write down questions. But we're going to guess that probably a body this size, the nature of the questions are probably, for the most part, similar. What we did Sunday is we ended up collecting 73 individual questions. We synthesized that down to about a dozen that seemed to have a common theme. So those questions, we came back and those questions were raised and addressed for the whole body Sunday. So that you hear those same questions that they heard Sunday, we're going to start with those. Does that make sense? Then when we're done, if there are some questions that we didn't address here, we're going to give you the opportunity to use those cards to write those down. As I said, Sunday we had 73 total questions, so and we've had those compiled, and I've got 5 sheets of paper with those questions on them. And so, as Father Jeff said at the beginning, still organized some those stuff all over the place. As Father Jeff said at the beginning, every individual question that is raised, there will be a specific answer. Those will be published either in the bulletin or on the website, or there will be handouts. There will be various ways for you to obtain those answers. So we're going to afford you that same opportunity tonight, but we're going to first go through these dozen or so questions so that if your question is answered in that, then we'll have to write them down. Okay? So the other good thing about this is Sunday we ended up taking about a 15-minute break. So we compile the questions and summarize them. So hopefully tonight's meeting gets done a little bit sooner because we only have that 15-minute break in there. So it's a little bonus for you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to raise these questions, and I think between Father Jeff and Paul, they're going to individually address them for you. The first one had to do with the Archdiocesan assessment, and Paul just talked about that a little bit. But there are a number of questions as to why that assessment occurs. What's the justification for it? Will the Archdiocese help? Will the Archdiocese reduce that? It's a question we hear a lot, so I'm going to let Father Jeff begin.
When people ask why does the Archdiocese assess us, and it's because they want our money. But also I think that to give a comparison is we receive many hidden services from the Archdiocese, and so they do need that money for that. For example, our insurance on our buildings is covered by the Archdiocese. We don't pay a specific insurance on our buildings. And so they're looking and saying, when money's raised, we need to take part of it. It's a lower amount than what we would pay on our normal income that comes into the parish, but it's still there. And when you look at a process like this, that's a lot of money. But the Archdiocese will not say, oh, you don't have to pay your assessment on that. They're pretty set on that. And then the other question was, will the Archdiocese help with that cost? The Archdiocese will not help us pay for the church out of diocesan money. One of the things we have to realize is that there is not a bank of money in the Archdiocese that is not coming from parishes. So there's not like this bank you just go to and we take money and we say, oh, it won't affect anyone. It's just there. The money that the Archdiocese has all come from parishes, occasionally from capital campaigns or whatever, but from parishes. So they can't just be saying, we'll give you this amount of money so you can build this and you don't have to pay us back, because then some other parish is paying for that. We've been on the receiving end of that for so long, I don't think we realize that when we get on financial footing, we would be saying, why are we paying for something for Our Lady of Visitation Parish? So that's what's behind that. They do help us and assist us in finding banks that will give us the best deal around, and that. The Archdiocese used to take money in from parishes and spend that money, and loan that money out. They're out of that business now because there were too many parishes, ours included, who were not paying off loans. And we're just like, oh, the diocese can float us. And when the economy really began to tank a few years ago, the diocese was in a very difficult situation. So they said, we aren't loaning money anymore. we will help you find a bank. The structure of our archdiocese is such that each parish owns its own property, but the archbishop is the trustee of all the properties, which means it's not his to take from us and say, I'm doing this or that. He can't do that. But he's the one who says, I'll sign for a loan or I won't sign for a loan, based on what people, what the loan, if it was an exorbitant interest rate, or if it was a loan for an amount that he says, there's no way this place is going to pay. He's going to say, I'm not going to sign for that. But they sign for it, and the archdiocese co-signs the loan for us. So not only does he have to sign for the loan, but they co-sign for the loan. Obviously, if we would fail to pay the loan, they would come after our property. And they wouldn't say, oh, we're going to take somebody else's property. They're going to say, what can the bank take of your property to make good on this loan? So the archdiocese is there to be supportive and helpful, but they aren't there like some kind of sugar daddy who's going to say, take out your loan, if you don't pay it, we're going to pay it for you. That's not there. So I hope that explains the role of the archdiocese in this. And I have to say, in us working towards a loan on our debt, which the archdiocese said, we want you to get a loan from a bank, and they kept their interest rate high to get parishes to move out of the diocesan bank, so to speak. The interest rates that have been found will allow us to pay off principal and interest at what we were paying for just interest only. So they've been very helpful for us with that.
The next question had to do with athletic fields. And we found that there were a lot of questions, both, I guess I would say pro and con, and also some questions of clarification. I think Paul went into some more detail tonight to try to clarify what would be included in the cost of this project with respect to the athletic fields. That is site work and seating, which I think we said was about $60,000. But there seemed to be some interest from some, gosh, it would be nice to have those athletic fields completed and part of the project. And there was another group that said, well, why do we have athletic fields at all? So I kind of, with that background, there's an array of questions I'm going to ask one of you to address them.
He wanted someone with such athletic ability to... I didn't even know there were soccer fields. Actually, I didn't know there were. When we look at this issue, I think one of the things to look at is one of the things that draws people into our parish, especially younger families, is that we have Christian-oriented sporting events. And we look, as parishes and as the archdiocese, as sporting events not simply as a service we offer and hope they win trophies. And the diocese has been working for 3 years on a whole new understanding of sports as evangelizing and forming young people. And one of the things I've been impressed with at St. John's is that many of our coaches, in fact I would say most of our coaches, are not people who simply coach and don't come to church. They're people who come to church, and the instilling of Christian values, prayer, and all of that have really been something I have been proud of in our parish. And so that is a way we're reaching young people, draws people into identity. Obviously, if we could not afford to keep, one of the things is, if you have property that you can hold on to, it's always good to do that as a church, because you never know what needs are going to arise. And so if we could afford to keep that property, we would. If we would have to sell it, that would be something we'd have to do. But I think it would be unfortunate for us to lose that property, looking at the value of what it could have. The other thing I think that property, the extension of that property, what we call sports fields, is it offers places for us to do things outdoors besides the festival. That is there. We could have an outdoor station trail. We could have things like that that I think could be attractive. Nonetheless, those things are not essential to the life of a parish, like a church parish, and those things are. But I think that's something to look at. One of the things is I will all of this falls back, and I'll talk about this in a minute, but all of it falls back on, I'm the one responsible for what we do. So I can go and say, well, Archbishop, the parish voted this way. And the Archbishop's going to say, I don't care what the parish did. You are the one who had to make the final decision, and have you made a responsible decision on this? So that's what I look at and say, we can't do anything without the support of the parish. I mean, that's why I'm saying we're voting, and unless it's something where we look and we say this is incredibly absurd or something. It's your parish. I hope to be here. I've been here 5 years. I hope to be here 10 more till I retire. But many of you have grown up in this parish, and many of you will continue to live in this parish until you die. I see myself as a steward of the goods of this parish, but it's your parish, and so we have to look at that. But one of the things I feel strongly about is we would not do any major fundraising, which would fall to the athletic committee, will not occur until we have the church paid off. Now that doesn't mean they can't do anything on those fields. It means that they can line up, but we aren't going to build a concession stand, or we aren't going to build stands or anything like that until everything's paid off. And that would fall to the athletic committee to do that, to take care of that. But we need the support of the people who want those things for the building of our church, and that comes first with that. So I want to be clear with that. The other thing I just want to say about the leveling of the land, or what do we call it, grading. We could say we aren't going to grade that land, but then that opens us up to having uneven land, which, regardless of what sign we put up, don't walk on this land, don't do this on that land, somebody walk on that land and get hurt, they can sue us, you know. And especially churches are just plum pickings for lawsuits, especially the Catholic Church, because they look and say, there's that rich Catholic Church, and we can do that. So I think the grading of that land, regardless, would be wise for us to do. And there's things we might look at and say, we can afford, we have people who can do that. I mean, there will be things in this whole process I think we look at and say, we can save a lot because there's people in the parish who can do this or that. So I just want to sort of explain that. So athletics, I think, are a valuable part of our parish, a very valuable part. They're not essential to the life of our parish. And so that's why I think those fields can be helpful for us.
The next set of questions dealt with the pricing. I'm sure if you were like me when you saw some of those numbers up on the screen, then your eyes popped a little bit. It's a little bit of sticker shock. And but what a lot of the questions had to do with how much detail is in there, this and that, how specific is this. So just if we could address a little bit further how that pricing was developed and how, I guess, how refined or specific is that pricing at this point.
Okay, and like I said earlier, the church pricing will be the same regardless if which location it's at. But square footage wise, we're looking at about 22,000 square feet for the church. And again, a church basement would be again 22,000 square feet for the basement. So based on the cost of that, and then the cost that we've included for the basement for the parish center is a finished cost. There could be some savings, and there would be some savings if we did not finish that initially. Basically be a bare basement. That could still be used for different functions, it just wouldn't be finished. I mean, some of our homes are not finished at this point, and as we moved into them, we may have finished them, as we had funds available. That would be the same scenario here. But what we're looking at specifically for the cost of the church and the parish center, you're looking at about $10 million of that cost would be church and parish center only. That does not include any of the other items that we have there again, you can kind of tell based on the cost for the in-town option, which was about 13.8, 10 million of that is church and church-based, or the parish center. So the big chunk of what we're going to be doing is, church-related, and that's the thing that we've identified that we do need. So it's not like we're throwing extra things in there at this point. I mean, we have scaled down, a lot of the initial, I'm going to say Taj Mahal, kind of sky things that we all wish we could have. And it could be a reality that, we do get some large donors that come through and say, here's your money, what do you need? And that would be great. But right now, based on current construction costs of like churches and churches that Richley has constructed, those are some of the prices they've given us. I will also say one of the reasons we did go with Richley Architects is they have historically been known for coming in under budget. So we pretty much know the numbers they have given us, we should not exceed those, and we should expect to come in lower than those. They're again, we're being conservative to make sure we have an all-in cost, that we are not going to come back, as we get into this and say, oh, we forgot this, we're going to have to add another, 500,000 or whatever. That's why we had the site work study done on the new property, because when we floated that initial budget numbers around, some of the members was like, I don't know that would be sufficient that we originally had. We had planners do that engineering study to give us a more detailed cost. They came back with that, and just to throw that number out there, the site cost for the new property is about 1.7 million. Now, that includes the parking lot, it includes the curbing, all the grading, excavation, bringing in the utilities, everything that you would need to construct a new home, and then some. There again, it's an all-in cost, includes landscaping, retention ponds, all those things that are going to be needed to basically build on the new burial property. Compared to in town, our site cost is looking at about 150,000. Again, just because we don't have the regular utilities, we don't have to do a lot of work. But there again, with the new property, there's also additional opportunities, like the sports games. I think that would be a cost that we wouldn't have in town.
After we choose the course of action, what will happen with the property that's not chosen? Will we sell it, or how will we dispose of that? How will we deal with that?
If we were to stay here, the property we have up on New Haven and Carolina Trace would be sold. But it would not be sold for a number of years, because people have told us right now that property is very undervalued because of the economy. And so we would want it to get up high enough that there's a better return on that. If we were to leave here, which unless we win the lottery or someone says, I'm leaving you that amount of money for Plan A and Plan B together, we would not be leaving. If we build the church, we're still going to be here with the school for a number of years. I envision it probably being at least 10 years after we're done with the church being built. To allow some years to pay off loans and then to bring about, the new money and those things we would need, designs and all of that. We would then sell this property. This property would present challenges to sell, but one of the things I look at, one of the questions asked, which is in the written answers that we didn't address, I said is, what would we do with this property? We would sell it, and because we would know we're moving a long way down the road, we could begin working with the city to look at what can this property be used for, what would they be willing to support to help us sell this property so it doesn't become a blighted block on the street down here. The city has been very cooperative with us in both cases, especially for staying down here. But I want to say, when I say the city has been cooperative, it's Dan Brooks in the Building and Planning Department, because none of this can be brought to City Council for resolutions until we know what we're doing. And so I want to say they've been very cooperative. And with the park, I don't think they've been deceptive. One of the things with the park is, just to clarify, we didn't get the park in revolutionary times. I think there were still Indians living here at that time. But there's Revolutionary era period. There's 3 graves in the park, in the back park. To sell that property to us, the city would have to trace, because the arrangement is if it quits being a cemetery, and actually they consider the whole park the cemetery. For it to quit being a cemetery, the property reverts back to owners. So stop and think what that would involve to find who are all the descendants of people from 1840 on that the city would have to locate and settle with on that whole thing. That would be, I just see that is impossible with that. But I think in looking at that issue of what we would do, I think I don't want to desert a place. There's value, but one of the biggest values I think of staying here, well, 2 things are, it is cheaper, but also I have to say I've talked to some very successful business people in our parish, and I said, well, obviously Plan B, we're talking almost $2 million more. And they said, $2 million is nothing. And they said, $2 million is nothing if they're giving us the $2 million. But anyhow, you know, I think in looking at that, and I lost my train of thought, we were really talking about that property over there and selling it. If we sold this property, we would want the city involved in helping us to be able to do that. I think the city would be, because I know what I was saying. They really want us to stay here because we sort of ground downtown. We bring in a number of people who come for church, a number of people who come for school, and so that could be looked at as a lot. But I think we have a sense of responsibility to the community, but I don't think we have a sense of responsibility to the community that we stay here simply to keep the community where it is when our needs might be different than that. So there's the pros and cons of all of that. But eventually we would sell this property if we were to move out.
Probably the most frequently asked question on Sunday in terms of just specific question, and I think we can do this real quickly, is what is the total amount of the current debt that we have right now?
We currently have about $850,000, and of that is $600,000 is on the property. The other $250,000 is the healthcare debt that we have. And we are in the process of refinancing that with FCM, which will give us a lower rate as father convention and give us the ability to start paying principal on that.
Question dealing with maintenance. And the question is, was the cost of maintaining 2 separate properties, we talked about the possibility of a church on New Haven Road and a school here, was the additional cost of maintaining 2 different campuses factored into the projections that were shown?
The cost of the maintenance has not been calculated into the projections because that is more of an operating cost. And when we would get to that point, we would then need to increase our operating costs and our budget to cover that. Probably at a minimum, we would be looking to hire either a part-time maintenance man or a full-time maintenance man. If we're maintaining the new property of 26 acres, I mean, you've got almost 6 times the amount of property to maintain as you do here. Plus, there's going to be a lot of mowing to maintain as well. Snow removal, you've got a bigger area for snow removal. So there will be increased maintenance costs. Utility costs, I'm working with Mike Richley to see if we can estimate what those utility costs will be. I know there's got to be some type of calculator out there somewhere that we can put in our square footage and tell us. The thing that we will know is that it'll be a lot more cost effective and more energy efficient for
The other thing I think we have to remember is that that utility cost, the utilities, will be the same for this property because the building is basically the same. Well, it would be a little higher if we had the parish offices, but if we have a new church here, that's going to still cost us the same for utilities. We would also need a part-time maintenance person for the new church and the civic center, because right now we're stretched as far as we can go with the maintenance personnel we have here. It's hard enough for them to get done everything that needs to be done. On the new property, one of the things that could be considered is in the summer you can hire teenagers or whoever, people out of school, to cut grass and to help with that. But it's still clearly going to require more work at the new spot, but it could be that there's ways for us to deal with the seasonal issues to a certain degree. And if you like riding the track, you might just say, hey, I'll cut grass for you anyway.
Okay, 1,200 seat church. Number of questions. Some folks thought maybe why not 800 or 900 or 1,000. Others suggested maybe we need to go 1,400 or 1,500. So how was the size of 1,200 arrived at?
The size of 1,200 was arrived at by the information we have at this point, looking at the following criteria. The growth we see in the Harrison area, and looking at that and saying, in proportion to that growth, we could expect, hopefully, that number of Catholics, but then also taking into consideration the sad demographics that there are not as many young people going to church as there used to be. So that is something that is factored in there. None of this is like carved in stone, but these are the general things that we find with that. Those issues that I mentioned earlier that I think contribute tell us that a 1,200 seat church is reasonable. We might be able to get by with a 1,000 seat church. An 800 seat church only solves our problem until we have to share a pastor. Once we have to share a pastor, we get, maybe, we'll be the one to get 2 masses on Sunday morning and the other parish gets 1. But we have no guarantee. So looking at least 1,000, I think to build under 1,000 would be very short-sighted. To build for 1,200, I think, is reasonable. I think we could get by with 1,000. And so all of these things that we look at, all of them are colored by what we find in the feasibility, the financial feasibility study we'll be doing.
Just as a quick follow-up, Father.
Yes.
If we did 1,000, would it be designed in such a way that there could be some expansion capability in it while still maintaining the integrity of the structure?
You know, I think we could look at that, but if we built, when I say build for 1,000, I mean the external shell would be that. Now, the architect could say, there's the external shell, and you could build onto that in a way that's there that would be reasonable. It's planned for expansion. It would greatly increase cost to have to build any exterior shell on that. There are ways to do that. In the long run, the cheapest way in looking to expand is to say the shell is big enough to maintain those issues. And as we said, you would finish it. It wouldn't be like, oh, you know, at a certain point, you stop, there's a cement floor that looks like, you know, someone's basement. You would wall off parts and things like that, which could be used for other purposes during that time. Tearing down those inner walls is going to be a lot cheaper than having to build more external walls. But to build for 1,000, we could do that and say we want to design for addition some way of the external shell.
I guess just one of the pricing we put up there, is that for?
That's for 1,200. One of the things Paul and I have been insistent on with the architect is that we have all the costs and that we aren't in the end saying, oh, by the way, we need pews, we need this, we need that. And I want to mention that because you might talk to friends of yours who say, well, 10 years ago, we built our church and it was $4 million. But often, well, first of all, you have to look at the increase in construction costs. But the second thing is many churches, when they were borrowing money from the archdiocese, would say, here's what it's going to cost us to do this. The archdiocese would approve the loan, but they hadn't considered it pews, altar furnishing, other factors of things you bring in once the building's finished. And that was because they could then get the loan, because they see we have so much money. And then they go back and say, oh, we need money for this and this and this. I think that's unfair to do that to people, to say, well, here it is, but here's not the finished thing. So when we look at the parish center, when we look at the church, we're looking at completely finished buildings at a price that richly looked at as the churches they have, which are considered very nice churches that people have really liked, that they didn't skimp on, but they didn't go extravagant with either. And so it's based on that, but it includes everything in that. And so I said, I don't want to be coming to people and saying, oh, well, you know, now we want this or we want that. Which I think then brings us to look and say, clearly, the undercroft, as Paul mentioned, or the parish center, as Paul mentioned, could be just a basement. And the parish I helped out on weekends before I came here built a church, had that basement. That basement was concrete floor, metal beams, an unfinished ceiling. And when they wanted to do things, they fixed it up pretty nice. Well, then they got enough money to finish it. Now it's like a meeting center inside. It's beautiful. But I think that they functioned with that in that time. It could also be that we look at church and say, we need our four walls, roof, pews, and all of that, but there's niceties that we're going to add later. It might be that we look and say, we don't have the money right now to redo the stained glass windows and remove them, but the windows that would be in plain glass, and hopefully I would hope it could be like the, I'm going to call them storm windows, I don't know what you call them now, but would be the windows we would have until the new ones brought in. And so we don't have to look and say everything has to be finished at once, but everything is paid. The amounts we're getting is everything finished at once, because I don't want to be coming back and saying, well, now here's this, now here's that. As I said, in the feasibility study of what we can afford, we'll know where we have to cut, what we have to look at, and what's realistic for us to do.
So while on the subject of finances, it's a two-part question. First is, how much money do we need to raise in cash and pledges to get this off the ground? Do we have to raise all 14 or 16 million? Or how much of that do we need to raise to be able to get it off the ground? And second, what do we do if, after doing our financial feasibility, we find that there's not enough support that either of them are feasible the way they were presented?
One of the issues in the Archdiocese right now is that we aren't getting clear answers on exactly what we have to have. I was told that before we could break ground, we had to have 50% in the bank, and then in the pledges, which would be made, usually pledges run from 1 to 5 years, some and beyond. But obviously, there's a better chance of a 1-year pledge getting paid completely than a 5-year pledge being paid completely. And so they rate how much more you have to have depending on the number of pledges that are still being paid off. With 4-year being the most that's considered. If you have a 5-year pledge, I said, we don't count that as any money. So you have pledges coming in. And then I was told, once you know that, and it seems that you're on good footing, you could take out a loan and finish paying off the building over time. However, Paul was told that you could take out a loan, but you couldn't begin building until you had all the money in. Which, to me, why would you take out a loan then, if you had to have all the money in? So I, of course, because I'm never wrong, thought, well, Paul doesn't understand what's going on. Except the clergy communication came, where the new director of land and resources, I forget what they call that job, But he's writing and saying, he said in his statement, I'm finding that we don't have clear definitions on this. But I know this, we could not build, we cannot begin digging ground until, and I was told this by Rich Kelly, that we have to pay off our debt first. So the first money we raise is going to go to pay off our debt. Even though it's a bank loan, they don't want that stretched out because that's just unwise to have an old loan you're continuing to do. But that would be figured in. Remember, we figured that loan into the cost of all of this. So that would be considered paid off and to our credit on this. And then we would have to have, I would imagine it's like 65% of the money in hand and considered with loans before we could go any further with this. But we're still trying to get an answer to this question, which seems that it might take us a while to get an answer to the question. The good thing about that is it's a pain for us at the beginning to say, we have to get all this money before we build. But then once we do build, we aren't saddled with a huge debt where we're paying off, and we can go on and operate at a much easier pace financially with that. Paul, do you want to add anything to that?
I'm tutoring him now.
Bob, I'm asking you that. So the second part is, what if we do the financial feasibility? It's not feasible.
Then I think we have to go back to the drawing board and figure out what we're going to do, what will be feasible, what can we do with the resources we have available to us. I think, though, to look and to say, let's look at what we need and then work from there as saying, we'll figure out what we got to cut back is a better way. So it depends how much we're off. You know, if we're saying we're off an amount that we look and say, well, we can postpone this, 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 and this, we can say we're going to go on with the plan because we can function with our original plan. If it's where we say, hey, we aren't even close, then we're going to have to look and say, what are we going to do? How are we going to deal with that?
Okay. One of the drawbacks of expanding on this property was the limited parking, as explained in the presentation. So a number of people asked questions about what have we done to look at all options to maximize parking here on this site. Some of the suggestions or questions that were asked, have you looked at options such as obtaining the park across the street? I think Father Jeff addressed that in the previous question. Acquiring additional property, some of the adjacent homes along Washington Street. Again, we touched on that, and then we can go into that a little bit more. Building a parking garage, has that been looked into? Or another question was, if we talked to other churches in the area and maybe looked at the possibility of building a joint parking lot for all the churches. So, garage, joint lot, Washington Street.
Okay. Okay, first I'll start with the parking garage. We did talk to our architect about the possibility of that. The cost is just astronomical. I think he's saying it's like $20,000 per parking stall. So it's very expensive, and there again, that would be something that would have to go through the zoning board, and I'm not for sure. The parking garage within Harrison, and we are considering a residential area, so I'm not for sure that would be an option there at all. But the cost was something that we said wouldn't be an option. The other thing was the adjoining properties for parking. I touched on it earlier with the parcels of property along Washington Street. We didn't calculate those in, and there again, as soon as if we would have included those and said those are properties we have, the property values would go up instantly. There again, we are going to just take a wait and see approach on those properties if we decide to stay at this location, that we would purchase those at fair market value as they become available. And then just kind of what we've done in the past with the other properties that we've acquired and taken those houses down. As far as checking with other churches in the area, I do know know, we have the parking lot across from Harrison Elementary that the city said is available for us. With that being said, the Life Spring Church down the corner also uses that lot. I don't know how parking has been in the recent weeks, but I think we have services that are at the same time as what they have services. In the past, we were starting at 10:30, they were starting at 11, so we got dibs on the parking lot. You know, there again, that's one thing, and when I presented that parking view of the area that we could include, that's why I noted the other churches in the area, because if we're growing, they're probably growing as well. And, you know, there's going to be some issues with street parking, and my concern is with the residents as well.
The other question, if you acquired all those properties on Washington Street, how many more parking spaces do you have?
It looks like a lot of property, but when you have to factor in a lane to drive down to go to those parking spots, you know, you're losing parking spaces. Possibly pick up maybe 40 to 50 spots if we're lucky. Some other folks have mentioned, well, could we take out the church? This current church, they get parking. That's an option as well. You're not going to pick up that many spots because you've got to have lanes to drive through for the parking. Some folks have also mentioned taking their current parish office and using that for parking. Those are all options that, you know, we could pursue at some point if we stay at this location.
The other day, in looking at that question, I just marked off by walking the space, and I thought, if we took down the rectory, I did an Emerald trailer to live in, but if we took down the rectory, what would we gain in parking spaces? Because, and looking at that, we'd gain 12 spaces. That looks big. I mean, when you look at that, but on Hill, remember, we have that hill that's there. So you can't just say we can go to the street, plus you need the lanes there. When I walked off the parish offices, it would be probably about 10 spaces, once again, because we have the hill, and we need that exit there, and so you can't have just people pulling out wherever with that. So the parking issue is very deceptive. I sort of thought, well, you have this, you have a lane. Well, your lane has to be either wide enough to be a double lane, or you have to have a lane on one side and a lane on the other, and they have to be wide enough for people backing out and all of that. So the parking issue, I have to say, the parking issue is my greatest concern remaining here, because I feel that while most of the people here would say, I'll walk 4 blocks for church, there's a lot of people who would say, if I have to walk 4 blocks and it's raining, it's snowing, it's too hot, it's too cold, I have the sniffles, they're going to stay home from church. And once people begin staying home from church, as a family, they tend to fall into that habit much more. So that is a concern I have here, parking. The other concern I really have is the festival. We clearly would not be able to pull off the festival as we have. And the festival last year brought in $110,000 of income for us. So whether we like to say we shouldn't be supporting a parish with the festival, in fact we are, and it's a major issue with that. Some people said, why don't we do the festival on part and then on our lot? Well, that would actually separate 2 areas completely with that. And one of the things we find is part of the success of our festival, we believe, is that we have made it a much more, I'm going to call it a circular design where everything's not in a row and you can sort of move easily from one place to another, traveling short distances. So those are concerns. I have to say honestly, that's my main concern about staying here. We already have a school here, we already have, but if we look and say, we can't provide parking and we can't provide for the festival, we have major issues with that. And so I think those are just issues that we have to keep in mind. My main concern of moving to the new place is the cost. So, it's not that one is an easy answer over the other, but I think it's something for us to consider.
Okay, did the architects, were they given the question of looking at this church and determining if this church could be renovated or expanded to meet our needs? And is that an option?
Yes, we've looked at that, and actually we explained that. This is from our last question, so maybe that person came in late or wasn't paying attention. But if you look on your chart and you take on your thing, and you take the church, which is the blue sort of square, which I want to say is not the final plan. But if you look at that and put it in the space where this church is, it cannot fit without us tearing down part of the school and probably the rectory. So that would add additional cost to that. The other thing I just want to mention, just in trying to keep things straight, we really, if you're looking at cost and saying, what's the difference, and this is a big thing, remember, if we were to buy up the property on Hill, we would add approximately $770,000. And figuring that is that people are going to say, hey, they're at our mercy. They want that property more than, we need. And then second, we have to take down the buildings, and it's so hard hiring arsonists these days. After a while, they get by the fifth house, it's suspicious. But so you want to consider that, not that we would need that up front, but over a period of time, we would need that. Now, the other thing that could be an issue, but I think it's probably more complicated than just saying, somebody's selling a house, we got to buy that house right now, is when the house goes on sale, we would have to, we would probably say we want to buy it when it goes on sale, because they could sell it to someone else who says, I'm going to sit on this house, And quite frankly, that's what happened with the red brick house on Harrison at the end of our parking lot. It got bought up. We were in negotiation trying to talk to the person who, it was a house that was, the lady who lived there went into a nursing home and would be going on Medicaid. And so, you have to sell your house and all this. The government gives you a certain number of months. If you don't sell the house on that day, even if you are 5 minutes from signing, that next day it goes over to the state to sell. They bring in their realtor, who is a regular, they just contract with realtors, and the whole thing starts over. It was on Friday, we were close to a solution. I don't want to say we were close to a solution. It went on sale Monday, the house was bought for $65,000, and we got a call a week later. Would you be interested in this property, which I bought for $125,000? We would pay $125,000. So this is why I think, just in the sake of, once again, I don't want people saying, we didn't consider this. We didn't put that in the cost because that's not an immediate thing we were doing. So that's just something to consider. It wouldn't be money we need immediately, but when it comes available, we probably have to be ready to jump and say, we can get that money. That's probably more than you wanted to hear on this.
Okay, we're near the end here. Clarification, we talked about phase 1 and phase 2 of the planned project. So would they have them back to back, or how much separation would there be, and would there be separate capital campaigns to finance them?
There would definitely be separate capital campaigns to finance them. I personally feel that we would need a breather between building the church and paying it off before moving into a second phase right away. Unless people are saying, hey, we're ready to go. So I don't want to carve that in stone, but my own thought is, I think we need a few years for us just to relax from those kinds of financial issues. Also, I think we would need a few years for us just to get back to sort of a normal, non-building life for a while. Because we're going to have to put a lot of energy into building, and I told the staff today, the two big concerns I have is that the other things I think will work out. God will take care of us getting where we need to be. My concerns are where we can make a difference, and that is, does the process bring us into division and impoverish us in our charity and our love and our being a parish together. Does it fragment us? Which I had thought we'd be at this point when I was here a year, and we're now here, I'm completing my 5th year. But I think that because we've waited, which wasn't about wisdom that I thought this is that I'm so slow at getting around to things, that we're here, we've been able to build a greater sense of trust with each other and things like that. So that's one thing. The second thing that's a concern that I said to the staff, they have to keep on me with this, is that we don't say everything stops and all we do is build. We need to keep growing in our spirituality. We need to keep growing in our relationship with God. We need to keep growing in meeting the needs that come up that people have so generously come about to do in my time here and were doing before I came. And so those are two concerns. So I sort of see that we might need a period to say, we're just going to sort of get back to normal and then look at this. I also want to say that people have asked the question, what is my commitment to be here and what is the Archbishop's commitment? I plan on retiring from here at 70. I believe, well, I'd like to retire at 70 simply because it would be nice to retire. I also have noticed that in parishes where pastors have stayed to 75, nothing happens. And the new pastor comes in and has a ton of things to get done. And so that's why I'm hoping to say, retiring at 70 is for the good of the parish, as well as something I look forward to. That's my commitment. People have asked, has the Archbishop made a commitment for me to stay here? The Archbishop will never make a commitment, not just our Archbishop, any Archbishop with an IQ above 70, which is not all bishops. IQ above 70 will never make a commitment, I guarantee you, get this priest for that long. There's too many things that can happen that could require him to move somebody from here to there. So that's my commitment. So I think what you might look at is say, the sooner we get this done, maybe we can get rid of him earlier.
Actually, Father Jeff is being pretty modest because he knows what the last question was because he was here Sunday. And that was, will the Archbishop commit to us that he would be here until the church was completed? So he was preemptively addressing that question. I guess the other question would be, what is the IQ of our current bishop? What do you want to answer that? Not your boss and mine.
All right. How many of you call the Archbishop? Actually, I think he's a smart man. He is a smart man, and he is a financially shrewd man. He, part of all these changes that have come about in the diocese, which I look at as being a pain for us, but I think is really moving our diocese to a much more fiscally healthy way of being. And I have to say, normally the plan is that you have 6 years, renewable, another 6 if the people say okay, and then if you wouldn't complete, you can be in parish for 12 years. So if you wouldn't complete a new 6-year term at another parish, which I wouldn't, you can stay for that amount of time until you retire. So when I came here, I was 55, and I'll be 70, and so it wouldn't be a 3rd term, so that's why I can stay. And it's not common that they move pastors. There's a number of pastors who will say, I did not ask to move, but they did ask to move. And they just tell people they did. I love it here. I love it here, and I'm too lazy to pack up.
All right, we're looking at my watch, it's 5 till 9, so I thought we'd have extra time because we didn't take a break tonight, but you must have gotten a more embellished answers to your questions perhaps than people say. But don't tell them that because then I'll start all sorts of controversies. But if your question was not answered in the last hour or so, there are cards in the pew, so we invite you, if you have a question that has not been addressed, please write it down. The members of our building committee are circulating through the church. They'll collect your questions, and we promise that we will get those with written answers back to you very shortly. And I guess we'll take just a couple minutes to do that, and Father Jeff will close the prayer.
Yeah.